Hi everyone, welcome to Modern File Services and Data Protection webinar by Backup Technology, Hitachi, and Nordstar Group. My name is K6 and I'll be your host for this session. Today, we'll learn how to improve your team collaboration and increase productivity from a great panel of experts as we discuss everything you need to know and hints how to solve security, business processes, and customer experience challenges. Joining us today, we have Isaac and Jeff from Hitachi, Glenn from Nordstar Group, and Mike of Backup Technology. Now, before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions during the session, please send them over using the chat panel below your screen. Kindly indicate if your question is for a specific panelist, and I'll try to bring them up during or towards the end of the session. Now, if we can't address some of your questions, we'll try to answer them via email. Also, this session is recorded, so we can send a copy in the next following days. Now, without further ado, gents, take it away.
Thanks, K6. I think I'm going to start off. This is Isaac Story. I'm from Hitachi. We just wanted to lay a little groundwork as to what's powering the solutions that Backup Technology and Nordstar are going to talk about today. Just kind of give you guys a brief overview of the portfolio and kind of where some of these solutions are coming from. So look forward to talking about that today. And I'm just going to talk to this one slide. So this is our data intelligence family that Hitachi supports right now. And this is kind of my primary responsibility at Hitachi. I'm a sales specialist for the West and the South regions of the US. I've been selling this particular portfolio of product now for about the last 8 years, and we've certainly changed quite a bit. We've added a lot of solutions to it and really built kind of an ecosystem around it, that our partners and customers can utilize very well. So our portfolio really started back in 2003 when we bought our the content platform from a company called Archivus back in 2003. We've been building it ever since. We're on the 9th generation of code on that platform, and that really sets the stage for all of the solutions that we build around it. We have a very healthy customer base. In fact, that's one of the key reason why we're a key leader with both IDC and Gartner is our customer install base and the maturity of our product. We've done really well in the archive space as well. That's why we're in most of the largest banks as well as insurance companies. So we've done a lot of work with compliance and archive storage, but we're really expanding from there. And the webinar today is really going to show you guys what we're doing from a NAS modernization standpoint. And I don't want to steal too much thunder from the Backup Tech and Nordstar guys. They're really going to focus on that use case. But just to kind of lay down what the portfolio looks like, we have the content platform at the heart of it, which is provides the the immutable storage that everything connects to. We also have what we call HCP Gateway, and that's going to be the focus of today's webinar. And it's really about providing those edge services, providing file for remote offices, providing file services that can go right back to a cloud storage central repository and kind of get that data out of the backup stream and be protected. We also have HCP Anywhere, which is a file sync and share product that connects to HCP. It kind of gives you that Box, Dropbox, or OneDrive experience for your end users, but allows you to run it in your own data center. And then Content Intelligence is a product we came out with just a couple years ago. It really enhances our capabilities to do search and data enrichment. And it really is an extremely powerful tool set that allows you to do things like data prep, data transformations, and definitely search is at the heart of that. And then just recently we announced a partnership with a company called Weka.io, and that is what our Hitachi Content Software for File solution is essentially a parallel file system, high-speed parallel file system, and that can also connect to the content platform and provide that extremely high-speed, low-latency file while providing the economics of the content platform. And what we really like to talk with customers about today, and I know today the focus is definitely going to be on file services modernization, as you can kind of see in the center there, but it's really about the broad sense of use cases that we're able to provide through our partners like Backup Technologies and Nordstar Group. we're really moving a lot into the search and analytics, as I'd mentioned with the content intelligence, as well as helping our customers to utilize, metadata enrichment, working in that AI and ML space, as well as, some of the stuff that we've been doing for years, is like ransomware protection, as well as data protection, being able to utilize our solutions as a backup target. So just to lay the groundwork of what we're going to be talking about today. The HCP gateway is really what the focus is going to be in that NAS modernization. So I am going to hand it over to Glenn.
Thank you. So thanks everyone for attending our call today. I really appreciate it. It says, by any measurement, 2020 was a year of tremendous disruptive change. The response of businesses to the COVID spurred more enterprise to implement cloud services and forced IT and security teams to scramble to protect a widely distributed workforce. Security threats also changed as the industry saw increase in ransomware and attacks on cloud and mobile devices. While we all know that some problems can be fixed with a product that's right out of the box, Nordstar recognizes that a one-fits-all solution doesn't usually meet every client's needs. So Nordstar has 10 years experience working with containers, and we've already expanded our Hitachi-based solution to now include a company called Rancher. This allows developers to address operational and security challenges of maintaining multiple Kubernetes clusters while providing DevOps teams with integrated tools for running containerized workloads. Working closely with our partner Backup Technologies and Hitachi, we have truly expanded our data availability offerings. This is giving companies the ability to not only secure their data, but also allow their employees better collaboration. This has been a missing piece in the mobile workforce before COVID, and now has become exponentially critical today, with many of the employees being permanently geographically dispersed. To dive deeper into these topics, I'm going to hand it over to Mike.
I'm with Backup Technology, and on the next slide, you'll see a list of our services. We started out mostly as a backup and disaster recovery company. And what is interesting about today is we're going to talk about how you can eliminate the backup portion. And we've been doing that for our clients for several years. We've worked our way from backup and DR into all types of hybrid cloud services, edge to cloud protection, private cloud implementation for customers. And on the next slide, you'll see we have a full accreditation and a global reach. We are on every continent with the exception of Antarctica. I guess the customer base doesn't warrant a server farm there, I suppose, although cooling would be all right. Okay, next slide. What we're here today to talk about is really we're going to look at modern file services and some of the key components to that: reliability, data integrity. A big important piece is read-only feature. What that gives us is immutability or worm technology. So once a file is written or an object is created, it can't be changed. So new versions are essentially new bits and bytes attached to that original one. So if for some reason somebody either deletes it, a deleted becomes a new generation called the deleted generation. And the same thing with encryption. If it gets encrypted, that becomes a new generation of the file, but the originals all stay in place. But really, the biggest key to this is having a rich metadata set. And really, if you think about how file systems work and file searches, I saw a report that said over 90% of files accessed are never used. So if you think about it, when you search a file system, it's going to look at all the files in that directory. It's going to return maybe 25 or 50, and you're going to find the one you need. But in order to do that, a lot of times it has to pull the files themselves. And the richer the set of metadata, the faster that can return, because we're going to have the metadata sitting on fast performant disk. You're going to search the metadata. And even if the file is sitting out in the cloud somewhere, you're going to get that fast responsiveness. And when the only files we need to refresh or repopulate are going to be the ones that you find. So I can't stress enough that really, in order for modern file systems to work effectively and the tiering to work, we need to manage that rich metadata set. And, Hitachi has a lot of tools around doing that and building that. So if we look at the next slide, I know what you're wondering. Yes, I drew that red line all by myself. And no, I didn't go to art school, but I did get it right the first time. So what that line kind of draws is most companies treat their structured data and their unstructured data very much the same. And especially when it comes to data backup, some of them have different levels of storage in their production, but most of the time they're going to get backed up, compressed, deduped using the same exact software and methodology that's used for structured data. And given that the unstructured data represents 80% of the data, we've found it very advantageous for our clients, eliminating all of this overhead that's associated with backing up 80% of their data. So since it's treated the same, it's still going to go through the same deduplication engine, the same backup, the same media, the same type of offsite stuff, multiple replications. And I know this is complicated because that's how we've made our living for 15 years. We've been doing data backup. And what we found is there's a lot of overhead in this. There's a lot of monitoring. Each one of those black lines needs to be monitored for exceptions and alerts and stuff. So there's a lot of places it can break. If you go into the picture for the next slide, you'll see essentially how simple it is when you have a modern file system, a virtual file system that has built into it all of the needs and requirements for a backup system. So what this allows you to do, we can repurpose some of the storage that was originally used, or it can be put in as a completely separate physical appliance or a virtual appliance, and we can reduce, encrypt, compress the data, and send it off to multiple locations. So let's take a quick high-level look on the next slide of the features of this virtual file system, the modern file services. It has built-in data protection. It has continuous data backup. So it's not doing a backup once a night or twice a day or something. You know, as things change, they get migrated and get updated and get based on the policies that you create. We're going to have file versioning. All of this stuff is rolled out. You go through the same type of setup as you would with a backup system. It has immutability. So the files, again, once they're written, they can never be changed by a user. They can delete everything on your local, but the copies are never removed. You know, retention policies. And onto this next slide here, you're going to see the key to the protection is having multiple copies in multiple locations. And that's all built into the file system or the file services. And so you can have access to the same files at a branch office as you do at the corporate office. You're just going to cache a different subset of the data. So you can choose to cache any files that haven't been accessed in, say, 6 months or a year, and you're going to keep those refreshed locally. And then you're going to replicate that out to as many locations to get as many of, so to speak, the number of nines after the decimal as you want. If you need 4 nines, you put it in more locations. You need 5 nines, 6 nines, you just keep, you know, we can replicate it to as many places as you want, but it's all driven and built by the policies under the engine in here. So let's go to the summary here on the next slide. You'll see what this is going to give you. Again, always a new object, continuous replication. But one of the keys is centralized control of the data, authentication, legal holds, access to the data. And this ties you back to a lot of the features and functionality from that first slide that Isaac showed you that has really that breadth of products. And once you have your data in this centralized repository, then you can do all of these searches and analysis of that data rather than having it in different silos or different places along the way. And again, enhance the metadata. So that's in a nutshell, that's my overview of what we're going to look at. And I think we have Jeff next to dive in a little bit on a demo.
So I'm here, Jeffrey Marshall with Hitachi Vantara. And what I'm doing today is I have several lab systems, but I wanted to actually show you the interface. And in addition to show you the interface, kind of show you those logical links that Mike had shown, which is going to be, you know, those connections to the object store target, as well as the actual gateway interface, and primarily focusing on what your end users would be seeing. Can everybody see my screen? Just anybody, just yell.
Yes, we can.
Thank
That's
you.
it.
Thank you, K6. Thank you. So what we're looking at is the gateway interface. And before I go into all of the gateway components, I just want you to see what your end users see, because I think that's honestly the most important thing. So here I am with a Windows machine. Obviously, a Mac machine and a Finder window would look very similar. And what you'll see is I have two shares down here. I have ABC Documentaries and Wolf Steel Finance. So these are shares. These could be on a NetApp. They could be on a Windows file server. They could be on, you know, EMC. These could be file shares anywhere. But they're not. They're actually on our gateway product. And what the gateway product seeks to do is everything that Mike talked about and Isaac spoke about. It's really taking those traditional files that you see out on fairly expensive storage, decoupling them from that expensive storage and putting them into an object store. Now, the object store was the thing that, you know, Mike and Isaac were talking about, you know, how much efficiency we have because we don't have to back that up. We're not writing that off to a net backup target. We're not writing that off. We're actually, because it's immutable, because we've taken a hash of it at the time of ingestion, it's you know, it's very efficient. It's backup less, and can be replicated to several targets, can be tiered to external cloud providers, yada, 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 all that good stuff. So that's really the value, the underlying value of doing this. And so from an end user perspective, what you're going to see is if I click on this Wolf Steel one, for example, you see a bunch of documents here. And obviously this could be hundreds and hundreds of shares. I just have two to keep it simplistic. But if you look here, what you're going to see is we have all of our files. This looks very normal. This looks like any file share that you would see. If I click over here on my ABC Documentaries one, you'll see that we have two files. These files happen to have a gray X on them. And what that represents is the archival attribute that Windows has. And that just lets you know that this file is really a stub. It's not actually residing on this platform. It's actually been stubbed off. And in my example, this has been stubbed off to our object store, our Hitachi content platform object store. So from an end user perspective, that's really the only thing they have to deal with is looking at that X. If you click on it, it launches just the same as it would if it were sitting there. On this share, which is also on our gateway, I set up a policy that keeps a copy here on the gateway as well as in the object store. So that's just kind of the difference that it looks like for the end user. It's really not much. If you're trying to get back a deletion stub or a previous version, the end user would very simply click on it and restore previous version. So the important thing about the gateway product is it's a Windows server. It's software written on top of a Windows server. So we don't need a bunch of additional software components to make it work and interact with CIFS shares. And we also have NFS for Unix and Linux as well, but I'm just focusing today on the Windows CIFS component. But all of the traditional things that you would do in a Windows server, if this was a Windows file share, all the right-click stuff works just the same. It's great. I mean, it's fantastic how it works. I mean, this restore previous version, if there was another version, you would see it here. You would go ahead and restore a previous version. So it's fantastic that it's built on Windows because there's no translation. It's just a Windows box. Okay, so that's, like I said, this is the end user. This is all the end user has to do is come here to their Windows Explorer or Mac Finder window and be able to access their files. So there's literally no user training, no end user training for this. Okay, now behind the scenes, what's happening is this is the gateway interface. You see, this is my IP address of the server that the gateway is running on. The gateway has the possibility of having a bidirectional replication, and that bidirectional replication can be set up between Windows clusters. So you can actually have the gateway set up in a very highly available state and have it, like I say, replicate between two. So it's always active using load balancers and things like that. But at the bottom, at the end of the day, this is a Windows server. It's a Windows box that I'm accessing this interface on. Okay, if you go to the summary tab, it just gives you kind of all of the shares that you have, as well as the storage targets that those shares are feeding their data to. If I click on shares, this is kind of just a nice abridged view where an administrator can turn on or off those shares. You saw the 2 shares that we spent our time in, the ABC documentaries. That just lets you know that that share is active and it's available for read and write. Lets you know that the protocol it's supporting is CIFS, and I can stop that share, which would turn off access to the share. Or if there were sub shares within there, if I had other folders within that share, I could then do that as well. Okay, so that's what is really nice about these kind of like, these summary pages. And all of these are obviously, you can click on these and go into the detail, which we're going to do in a second. Next page is storage. Now this is where you're telling the gateway that these shares that I'm going to mount and have my end users access and dump files in, I don't want this data to sit there on this particular server. I want to keep this server very lean and use it for processing. And so what we do is then we have the storage target set up. So what you would do is you would come here, and when you go to add storage, these are the types of storage targets that you can select. So, I mean, you could write it to one of these others, but you don't get the benefits of having that backupless kind of window. What we're trying to promote is the use of, the S3 target for HCP, which is going to really, really give you kind of that bottomless bucket of data storage. So you go ahead and you set up your new storage. And then once you set up the storage, you're going to go ahead and set up a storage group. And that storage group is just going to say where the target resides. And that is pretty much it. So from there, your storage is already set up. Now what we do is we go to the shares tab. And from the shares tab, now you can just start adding your shares. And so what you'll see is you can name your share, give it a description, select your storage group from one of the previous ones that you've set up. I set up one for one of the documentary tabs here, and then you can scroll down to the other 2 that I set up, so Wolf Storage and ABC Documentaries. So you select that storage group that you've previously created, turn on the share, yes. If you want to set up a hashing algorithm, you can, but very unnecessary when you're using the HCP object store in the background, because that actually does it itself. And then what you also can do here from the policy perspective is set up a policy. I'm going to get to those in a minute where we set those up. But what a policy does is this is a specific set of instructions you want to happen on the share. Do I want the share to automatically stub off and write it to the object store, leaving a stub behind? Do I want to leave the original file on the share and make a copy to the object store? So these types of things you can set up in whatever policy you want. So you can customize the policy and apply that to one or multiple shares. Mode is going to be rewrite. Enable cache. Enabling cache just means that we're going to be utilizing the gateway product almost as a file cache. So when you click on it, you can have it rehydrate the file, and then when the policy runs, it'll evacuate it off and leave the stub behind. So it's just some kind of internal housekeeping and ways that you can keep the system fairly lean. And then retention is another thing that you can set. So we just have some random retention values in this particular system. So you can apply retention to the files as they enter this share. What this does is this ultimately carries through to the object store level, and that file is actually prevented from being deleted until the retention period has been reached. So it just gives you some really nice compliance types of features. If it was all finance documents and you had a 7-year retention, you apply a 7-year retention. Everything written here is going to fall under that 7-year retention, and so on. So it gives you some control on what's going into that file, that share, and how you can deal with it. The rest of these here, compression, encryption, dedupe, and replication, these are features that also happen on the object store, but for special use cases, you may want to do that on the gateway as well, but definitely not necessary and not required. Okay, so that's pretty much how you set up your share. So once your share has been enabled, then like I said, it basically looks like what your end users see here. Like I said, I have 2 different policies here. I have a immediately evacuate to the object store policy here, and I have a copy policy on this one. And I did not set retention on either of these 2. So just kind of left it open for demonstration purposes. So that's pretty much what end user sees and how you do the base configuration. There is a file explorer view, which kind of mimics what you'd be seeing on your Windows Explorer. So you can kind of see some of those files, and you actually even have the option of downloading it here, and you can see some of the file attributes over here. Events is going to be just event logging, letting you see different things that has happened on the system itself. We have underneath that, we have logs, and then we also have reports, and then policy, operations, support, and configuration. And we like to pretty much show you some of the reports you can generate, but primarily this is from an administrator's point of view, not necessarily an end user's point of view. So we have events and policy and so on. Like I said before, from a policy perspective, this is going to include all of those things like your copy policy, as well as your retention policies that you have set up. So that's makes that portion of it really nice. And so that is really what the gateway does. Gateway decouples you from expensive storage and expensive NAS providers and pushes that data over to an object store. And if you look here, what you're going to see is this is the HCP. This is a tenant that has been created as a target for the object store. I have all of my Wolf Steel data is being fed to this particular tenant, and then my object store policies are managed here. So it just makes it really convenient, I guess you could say, to have that. The actual gateway itself has an ability to set up backup, and what that backup does is really going to just be backing up the stubs and backing up the configurations. And what you're doing is you're backing that up to the object store. So you have really no vulnerabilities here. It makes it really, really nice. So this entire configuration of these shares and the gateway and all of that, that too is getting backed up to your object store. So if you were to lose a gateway and you didn't have a robust replication topology set up, you could put in a new Windows server and restore everything from the object store, which makes it really, really kind of elegant, I think. And then this just gives you some operational types of things. And then there are some configurations. Basically, I told you that this system is really configured to be a cache type of a system. And so in doing that, you can set up quotas, you can set up watermarks, you can set just some really kind of cool things that you can set up to keep this gateway, and some people call these on-ramps, they call this kind of thing, a NAS on-ramp or a file on-ramp, because you're taking a traditional NAS profile and you're turning those NAS types of files into objects which reside on some form of an object store. So that was pretty much what I had today. And, we can always have follow-on discussions if people are interested in, looking at the object store itself and what it has to do. The gateway itself is designed, like I said, to be a cache. And so what you have is you have quotas, or you have watermarks that you set up on these individual shares. And so the share itself, you don't want it to get 100%. You want to keep that share fairly lean. So what we have is watermarks and cache quota capacities that make sure that the system makes sure that those stay under, so that you don't exceed your storage capacity on the gateway product itself. Okay, so that is my presentation. And if there's any questions, anybody please feel free to ask those. And then in the meantime, I'll have the interface up. So if some of these questions are pertinent, I can reference back to the interface.
All right, Chef, one question we have in here. How do we access our data in the event of site loss?
Yes, absolutely. So what you would typically have is you would have either a Windows cluster replication topology, or not even a cluster. You may have site-to-site Windows server replications, which would in effect replicate this entire scenario. And so through the use of a front-end load balancer, or even bare bones DNS rerouting, you would be able to get back at your data in this same format. Okay, now if this data, if you did not have a replication set up and you lost the gateway server, that would be that scenario which I described, where all of the configuration, all of the stubs, everything is getting backed up to the object store. So you would be able to just spin up a Windows server, put on the gateway application, and then rehydrate everything back to the gateway server. So if you didn't have your ducks in a row in a replication topology, you could always bring a server, rehydrate everything back, which makes it kind of nice. And then lastly, you also have access, don't forget, your files really aren't here. Your files are on a very efficient object store. So you still can have the option of going into a scenario where you can still get to the file content directly from the HCP itself. So these are all directories where your files are. We've just kind of decoupled them from the NAS presentation, from the Windows share presentation. So you have those several options of getting back to your data. Hopefully I answered that, but yeah, that was a long-winded answer to several ways of doing it.
Okay. And hang on, we have another one. So do you have an assessment tool that can discover how much is old or stale and maybe eligible for archive?
Yes, we do. And I think it might have been on one of Isaac's slides, but within our content solution here, we have it's called Hitachi Content Intelligence. And what it does is it allows you to do file assessments, essentially what we just described. And what it does is it allows you to look at the metadata of all of the files sitting out, say on a share, where, home directories, what have you in your environment, and it allows you to create a dashboard, in essence, showing you, all of the POSIX file attributes of a given file. So last access date, owner, does the owner still have an Active Directory account? I mean, all of these types of triggers that may lead you down the path of, I have a bunch of files out here that haven't been accessed in 7 years, and I want to wipe those out. I don't want to spend money storing them, managing them. And so the HCI tool allows you to do those file assessments. And, that's really the best thing of all, is to do a file assessment up front so that you're not dealing with garbage data that really can be deleted.
Mhm. I see. How about when an employee leaves the company? What happens to their files?
Perfect. Yeah. So what happens because all of these files have been worm protected and are kind of, in essence, really decoupled from the end user itself, the person at the Active Directory level can actually, person's manager or an administrator can get back into that person's file content data. And they can do that. We have, if you look here under configuration, and we have some triggers here set up for Active Directory. And what you'll see is we have some, there's our watermark stuff. We have some administration features that allow you to override. So you can basically have it set up so that you have an admin group that overrides the AD permissions, so that if a person is no longer with the company, you can actually still get access to their data. And even if they delete a bunch of their data, so they're walking out the door and they grab their computer and they say, the hell with these people, I'm going to delete all the data that's important. And they tried to delete it. Well, what happens is it really didn't delete it. It put a deletion stub in there. And you have the ability through this interface, if you're set up as an administrator, to come back and restore a deleted version. So it actually gives you a lot of control as an administrator and a lot of flexibility.
How about for a ransomware attack, for an example, or the file is corrupted? How do you roll back to the previous version of it?
Sure, that's perfect. The thing about decoupling this from a normal file, a traditional file infrastructure, is that the file itself is being placed into an object store. And in doing that, the file is kind of inoculated, if you will, because what happens is obviously if somebody clicks on a file that's been stored and that file has some sort of ransomware, it could be launched and could cause some damage. However, the way that we store the files and the previous versions is that the file itself is just a file. It's bits and bytes. If it's an executable, there's nothing that executes the file in our storage. It just sits there. And so what happens is as a new file comes in or a corrupted file comes in, we, by definition, have saved the versions behind that. And there are some features on our object store which allows you to manage the numbers of versions that you're managing, so you don't have millions of versions of the same file. So it's called version pruning. So we do that in the background. But for the most part, people are keeping a year's worth of versions on any given file. So that can be done, like I said, directly through the Windows Explorer interface by right-clicking, and we basically call this end user restoration. It allows you to roll back to those versions. Typically, those are going to be date-based, not necessarily event-based, but those will be date-based, so you'd be able to roll back to a previous version. And in the object store, the ransomware can't do any harm because it's basically being stored as a blob sitting in a database. So it kind of protects you two ways that way. It allows you to restore and also keeps the actual harmful file at bay.
So we have another question here.
Okay.
Does the capacity of gateway have to be the same as the capacity of the object storage?
No, definitely not. That would, in essence, kind of defeat the purpose of it. We want the gateway to be very small, actually. We only want the gateway to have the footprint of the burst rate of files written to it. So, for example, your backend object store could be 10 petabytes, but the gateway itself really only has to be sized to that amount of writing to it that would happen, say, in a 12-hour period or an 8-hour workday period. So you want, if somebody's writing a file that's 100 gigs or a series of files that's 100 gigs, and that would exceed the capacity of the gateway to evacuate those files and leave the stubs behind, that's what you use as your sizing for the gateway. You don't use total capacity. So you want the gateway, like I say, to be more processor oriented, less storage, so that you're protecting your files and also not incurring cost of having expensive spinning disk.
Mhm. And speaking of which, do you have a gateway for each location? And do you need to be on the same configuration?
No, you don't necessarily need a gateway for each location. You certainly are. Some of our customers do have that, and no, the configuration can be totally different if you want. I mean, you can have the object store behind it, and you can have several gateways writing to different buckets within that object store, or you could have several people writing to the same bucket if you'd like. It doesn't really matter. The gateways are all going to kind of look the same to everybody, but the end storage itself can be drastically different. So you can have multiple gateways or one large gateway, and if your networking is strong, have that service your entire company if you'd like.
Any more questions from our attendees? Okay, hang on. I think we have last one, since we have attendees from different industries. So here's the question for you. What type of audit log or compliance do you have, for example, HIPAA or other compliance available for Gateway?
Yes. So Gateway actually originally was developed for compliant use cases, namely in the securities and medical profession, as well as the object store. Ironically enough, both of those were written to serve compliant needs. That's why we place such an emphasis on retention and different policies that you can set up. And the worm component of that is really key. So that worm, that immutability, the inability to modify a file, basically you're saving it as a different version. You're really turning spinning disk into like optical DVDs that can't be modified is really what we're doing with all of the software triggers running on the system. So yes, we are we are very, very compliant, if you will, and meet most, if not all, of the requirements pertaining to HIPAA and any of the SEC types of things, ISO standards on both products. And, it would just kind of be on a case-by-case basis. You'd have to look and see if there was any gaps. But honestly, we have several hospitals using this for HIPAA, and we have several financial firms using it. And then every other company, for whatever reason, kind of falls under that. So any kind of privacy types of information, those types of things, all adhere to the, best practice types of standards.
All right, to all the attendees, if you do have follow-up questions for Jeff, Mike, and the rest of the team, feel free to reach back to us. At the same time, we are going to follow up with you and sending over this recording. Jeff, thank you for your time. Very informative session.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Do we have some time to answer this one? We have another question for Roy.
Of course.
Does your system deal with long-term bit rot?
Yes. The not necessarily the gateway product itself, but the object store behind the gateway, definitely. We have right now, I don't know if I can say their names, but government agencies that are utilizing this for long-term archive of any kind of federal records that you can imagine, without saying anybody's names. And so that was one of their main requirements, was to talk about bit rot and any kinds of hash collisions, those types of things that would potentially happen with a traditional NAS and then backup system, and then restoration of that backup, which can introduce some complexities. So yes, we have some reports on that, some white papers, if you will, that kind of talk about the reliability of that and the prevention of any kind of hash collisions and bit rot that would happen. So we have some things that we can provide people if interested.
Nice. All right. I know everyone values their time. To all the attendees, thank you very much for joining us. Any last words from the panelists? Mike, would you like to take over?
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for calling in, and you can reach out to us directly if you want to talk a little bit more about your specific use case and if there's any room for this solution to work in your environment. So here's our contact information, and you'll also get a copy of this, and we'll be reaching out to you directly. Any feedback is always welcome. So I appreciate you for showing up today, and everybody have a great afternoon.
Thanks everyone for your time.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.